What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Legends of the Dugout. I'm here with a special guest. He's been on my show before, and I posed a question: why do you collect baseball? So I'm bringing on my friend, national dealer, Mike Pike.
Hello,
Mike,
Dave.
thank you for joining me. Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good. And yourself?
I'm well. I got a little cold, so I'll try not to cough too much and
Well,
uh,
it'll
try
be
to
just fine.
try to make sense. But it's how these colds go. It affects your brain. It's interesting that you refer to me as a national dealer. We go to one show a year. My partners Tim Newcomb and Chris Bland, and it's the national. And as I said to you last summer, we do it for one reason: we buy more cards. We sell cards and buy cards. We just feed that habit. So
Yeah, I need to learn that. I need to learn that habit.
well, yeah. The problem is that the national you can't get a booth anymore. It's ridiculous. But so your question, why do we collect? That's something that I think about a lot. That may be a little strange to people, but oftentimes my wife will say, "Why do you collect this stuff?" And when we talk about, I try to give her an informed answer, but it's something that I've thought about because I've been a collector most of my life. The last collecting I came to was baseball because of when my son was little and we'd go to baseball card shows, and that just kind of unlocked my interest in the history of baseball. But it seems to me that there are a number of reasons why people collect. Some people collect because it's an investment for them. They're just always trying to score something relatively inexpensively and then turn it around and make a lot of money. And I guess there's a thrill and a rush in that, but that's certainly not one of the motivations for me collecting. Some people collect because they like. I have friends who collect because it takes them back to when they were younger, back to memories that they had as a kid going to see baseball games. My friend David McDonald, who lives in British Columbia, grew up in New York City, and he can remember at age 9 going to an old timers game and watching Frank Home Run Baker play. Frank Home Run Baker was one of the stars of the dead ball era. And for David, that's a powerful memory that he has. And, he collects things as a result that relate to that and do a lot of other memories that he had as a kid going to see baseball games. He was fortunate enough to see baseball games at Yankee Stadium. So some people collect to, I guess, recall those memories. That's not a motivator for me because I don't remember a whole lot about going to baseball games. Some people collect because they're interested in the history of whatever it is that they're collecting. And, kind of the sociology, if you will, of what they're collecting. Because the items they collect, those physical representations, resonate in a historical way. And without getting into my academic background and, my degrees and all of that, when it comes to the history, when it comes to the associations, the historical associations that we can make historically, that's why I collect. I collect because I'm interested in the history. And those representations of little baseball cards or tickets or baseballs, those associate, in my mind, those are associations with the history of the game. And it's kind of interesting too, because there's a certain element of collecting that allows you, through having a representation, like having a card of Ty Cobb, it allows you to, in effect, get one little step closer to Ty Cobb. It takes you back in time a little bit. And that's a motivator for me. And especially, if you have, for example, why do kids get all excited? They get a baseball signed. They get a baseball signed by Shohei Ohtani, and they take it to school the next day and they show their friends, and their friends are like, wow, you got to meet Shohei Ohtani. It brings you that much closer to Shohei Ohtani. You've touched greatness, if you will. So I think those two elements are really what kind of motivate me to collect, because I love history. I love learning. And the more I collect, the more I learn. Some people would say, well, you're wasting your time learning about the history of baseball. But I don't feel, for me, that that's a waste of time at all. It's an enrichment. It helps me understand more about the game. And I think it helps understand, too, more about American society as well. All of which brings me to the Negro Leagues. That's my passion of late. I'm finding out things that I didn't know existed. It seems as though every day I get a card, or I consider buying a card, for example, I'm learning something new. You and I were talking before we came on the air here. We were talking about one of the players I'm going to refer to today, and that's Titelo Vargas. Very few people watching this show are going to know who Titelo Vargas was, but he was a great player, and he was a terrific hitter. And he should be in the Baseball Hall of Fame, but he's not. Well, why? Titelo Vargas had a black skin. That kept him from playing Major League Baseball. By collecting the Negro Leagues, we're bringing back to life, and we're recognizing a history that for so many years people were unaware of. And I think that's important. I think that's important to expand our sense of who we are as a society, and of what makes up the history of this society. So if you want to start the little PowerPoint you've put together, so I don't have to hold up cards, you can do that. Now, one of the things that I want to clarify is that if you're interested in the Negro Leagues, you're interested in African-American baseball from 1920 onward. The Negro Leagues didn't officially begin until Rube Foster in 1920 organized the first Negro League. Prior to that, African-American, there had been a couple attempts at leagues, but they didn't succeed and they weren't sustainable. Prior to that, African-American baseball was largely barnstorming. Here, for example, is a real photo postcard from 1910 of Brown's Tennessee Rats. Now, what's interesting about Brown's Tennessee Rats is that Brown is the name of the guy who organized the team. They were not from Tennessee. They were from Oklahoma or Missouri. I can't remember which. I think Missouri. And they were a barnstorming team. They didn't have they didn't have a place they called home. They traveled all over the Midwest, the upper Midwest, and they played what was known as AAA baseball. They would play anybody, anywhere, anytime, any place, anytime, anybody. So they traveled all over. So when you talk about collecting Negro League baseball, you're actually talking about collecting African-American baseball, black baseball, because you've got these time constraints. So this, for example, was a real photo postcard, and the guy who I'm not showing the reverse side, but the guy who sent this postcard sent it to a friend of his, and the fellow who sent the card actually took the photo, took it to his local drugstore, had a bunch of postcards made, and then sent them out to friends. So this is one of the few representations we have of Brown's Tennessee Rats, because there were no baseball cards. Nobody was issuing postcards of Brown's Tennessee Rats. This came about because somebody took a photograph of the team, had postcards made, and sent them out. And lo and behold, it ends up in my collection over 100 years later. So you can show the next one. So the question becomes, if you're going to collect African American baseball, what does that mean? Well, it means you're going to collect more than baseball cards. You're going to collect things like ephemera, things like tickets. You're going to collect maybe programs. It also means you're going to collect photographs, because a lot of players did not have baseball cards. And the only representations we have of them is through photographs. When you think back to that postcard I just showed you, that's the only representations we really have of Brown's Tennessee Rats are real photo postcards, like the one you just saw. What you're also going to discover is that you're going to learn a lot about Cuban baseball. You're going to learn a lot about Venezuelan baseball, about Puerto Rican baseball, about Mexican baseball, because those four countries, and others as well, but they were the four major ones. They were the ones who issued the baseball cards. Because in America, given the fact that African Americans weren't allowed to play the game until 1947, there were no baseball cards. So people couldn't go to their local store and, buy a pack of cigarettes and hope to get a Ray Dandridge card in that pack of cigarettes, because it didn't exist. But what did exist in Cuba, for example, and this is really where baseball cards depicting Negro League / African American players begins. In places like Cuba, they issued cards, because in Cuba, there was a thing called the Winter League. And in the Winter League, a lot of the players African American players who played on the mainland in America would come to Cuba and play in the Winter League. And the Winter Leagues, picking up on American advertising ingenuity, the Winter Leagues issued cards. There were manufacturers, tobacco manufacturers, who issued cards. And what were the cards they issued? Players who played in the Winter Leagues, which included Cuban players as well as American players. Now, what you see here is the first issue from Cuba in 1909. And this issue was issued by tobacco company called Cabañas. In 1909, and Cuba by this point was just baseball crazy, like America. In 1909, the Detroit Tigers came to the island to play a series against All-Stars, Cuban All-Stars. And Cabañas said, well, you know what? To commemorate this, we're going to issue some cards. And we're going to issue 3 different kinds of cards. And by the way, the Cuban All-Stars were made up of All-Stars from the Havana team, which are in red. And if you go to the next slide, as well as Almendares, which were in blue. By the way, everything I'm going to show you today is from my collection. There's nothing that I've, snagged from the internet.
Okay.
And the Detroit team had kind of gray-black backgrounds, where you see the blue here. For the members of the Tigers, it was gray-black. What's interesting about the Tigers, neither Ty Cobb nor Sam Crawford made that trip. They thought, well, this is just, I'm not going to waste my time. We'll crush these guys anyway. Well, guess what? The Cuban All-Stars beat that team 8-4. And it sent a wake-up call. By the way, Esteban Prats did play in the early Negro leagues, and that's why I really value this car, because he was a guy who played in America. If you go to the next one, this is a 1910. The next year, there were teams made up of the Philadelphia Athletics and the Tigers once again. And by the way, this time Ty Cobb said, "Yeah, I'm coming to Cuba." And so in 1910, Punch Cigarettes issued a commemorative card. And these are extremely rare cards, because if you look at it, we can't enlarge the image, but if you look at it, it's literally a photograph, a tiny, tiny photograph that's been affixed to this piece of very thin cardboard with a border around it. And it's one of the rarest Ty Cobb cards among Cobb collectors, but he does appear in the Punch series. This, by the way, is Juan Viola, who is Cuban. And if you go to the next slide, most collectors will know him as Juan Violat, who is part of the T206 set. We don't know why the T was added to Viola's name, but it was. But he was Cuban, and he did play for a short time, again in a very small kind of Negro League organization. But he was a member of the Jacksonville team, as he's depicted here on his American card. But again, he was allowed to play in America, because if you look at his skin complexion, he's very light-skinned Cuban. He was not a dark-skinned Cuban, which allowed a number of early Cuban players like Adolfo Lute, for example, who was on the 1919 Cincinnati Reds team. They were allowed to play Major League Baseball because they didn't have dark skins. So they were able to, in effect, slide by. In 1910, from 1910 to 1923-24, there basically are no cards anymore in Cuba. But if you go to the next slide, you begin the great era, the golden age, if you will, of Cuban cards. And this is an example of a 1923-24 Billiken card, Billiken. A lot of people want to call it Billiken. But in 23-24, for the 23-24 winter season, Billiken issued these cards commemorating or highlighting the players. And again, they were used as a means for people to buy the products, because you would get a card. But they're very thin, they're very fragile. They're photographic paper. And you got to keep in mind that these are cards that came from Cuba, where where it's very hot, it's very humid, and for things to make it off the island in one piece is pretty remarkable. The beacons are highly prized cards showing Negro leaguers like Clint Thomas, the guy who's pictured here. Clint Thomas played for Hilldale, and the Hilldale Daisies, as they were known, or Giants, but primarily the Daisies. Hilldale was based in Darby, Pennsylvania, which is right adjacent to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's about a 40-minute drive from where I live. The Hilldale team was one of the premier Negro League teams in America. I think it was 1925. They won the Negro League World Series. Clint Thomas was a key member of that team. He played for Hilldale. He played for the Brooklyn Royal Giants. He was a stud. The guy was a great, great player. We wouldn't know about Clint Thomas. Well, we'd know about Clint Thomas from historical records, I suppose. But we wouldn't know what Clint Thomas looked like if we didn't have these cards issued from Cuba. If you go to the next one, you'll see another pretty famous Negro League player, Jesse "Nip" Winters. He was a pitcher. He also played for Hilldale. He was a teammate of Clint Thomas's. He was a dominant pitcher, just one of the greatest pitchers of that era, and one of the reasons that Hilldale was so dominant. You go to the next one. This is Red Ryan. Actually, his name was Merwin, but his nickname was Red. Also a pitcher, also played for Hilldale. But what I should have mentioned too was that most of these guys, Clint Thomas as well, Nip Winters, Red Ryan, all these guys played for multiple teams. If it was not unusual, for example, for a team to be playing some big money game, and they would want someone to come in and help them out. And so, they'd turn to Red Ryan and say, "Hey, I'll pay you X number of dollars to come play this one game for us." And Red would look at his schedule, and if it was okay, sure, I'll do that. It was another form of earning money for him. Again, we wouldn't know what Red Ryan looked like if we didn't have these cards from Cuba. If you go to the next one, this is a different Cuban card, also showing Red Ryan, a card issued in the same year as the Beacon, 23-24, but this is by Nacionales, another tobacco manufacturer. And, you can see here that in Cuba, there was this culture that several producers were producing cards. And it just like in America, there were several cigarette producers producing cigarette cards, tobacco cards during the deadball era. If you go to the next one, this is one of my favorite players. This is Jesse Hubbard. Also, well, Jesse didn't play with the great Hilldale teams, but he played primarily with the Brooklyn Royal Giants. A very accomplished pitcher. I mean, I don't think he was at the level that Red Ryan or Nip Winters achieved, but a very accomplished pitcher. And nonetheless, if you go to the next photo, you'll see this is his Aguilitas card, 1924-25 Aguilitas. A very it's a scarce issue. I happened upon this one at a show a year ago, and I was just dumbfounded to find it. And I didn't even ask. I didn't even ask what the price was. Basically, I just said I want that card because Jesse Hubbard cards are really difficult to find. And if you notice at the top of this image, you see a little hole. If we, if you could zero in on that hole, you would see it's perfectly round.
I can bring it up now.
Yeah. Can you bring it up any further?
No, that's it.
Okay. Well, what happened with a lot of these cards, and again, this is done on photographic paper, bugs would eat holes in them. There's something that attracted them to whatever it was that was used to print the cards. But bugs would be attracted to it, and they'd quite literally eat a hole in the paper. So that, some people might find those holes, a little off-putting, but they're not off-putting to me at all because these cards are just so difficult to find. I'll bet you if you go to the National this year, you will be hard-pressed to find anybody who has a Beacon or any of these early Cuban issues. They're just that scarce. Now, I mentioned to you too that in the regular season, but when I say the regular season, in the summer, in the warm months, in America, the Negro Leagues, the Negro League teams would play all over. They would play not only their scheduled games, but they would play other teams as well, because you got to keep in mind that these are players who love the game of baseball, and they will do anything to play that game and to have that game support them in life. They're denied playing in the major leagues, so they don't have sponsorships. They don't have cigarette companies paying them a little bit of money to use their image. They're not getting regular salaries, paid salaries, and that sort of thing. They don't have endorsement deals. They're playing the game because they love it. And in order to play that game, they would have to play everywhere. So in 1920, there's a little town west of where I live, about 15 miles from here, called Parksburg, Pennsylvania. And if you blink real fast when you drive through it, you won't see it. But in 1920, they had a really good industrial league team, a semi-pro team. And one of the teams they played was the Brooklyn Royal Giants. And if I'm going to hold this up to the camera a moment, Dave. This is a photograph from one of the games that the Brooklyn Royal Giants played against the Parksburg Iron Company. And if you look carefully, you can see the guy standing on the mound is being talked to by the umpire, and there are a bunch of players gathered around. The guy standing on the mound is Jesse Hubbard. This guy. This was a game. This was the third of 3 games that the Parksburg Iron Company played against the Brooklyn Royal Giants. In the first game, the Giants trounced them. It was like 6-1. Second game, Pico, as they were known, the Parksburg Iron Company, Pico played small ball, and they bunted their way to a victory. They basically bunted their way to a 4-1 victory, and it kind of incensed the Brooklyn Royal Giants. So there had to be a third rubber game, and so they organized that game, played in Parksburg, of course, and it went 15 innings, and they had to stop it because of the sun was going down, and they didn't have any lights, and it was tied 3-3. But during that game, one of the players on the Parksburg team alleged that Hubbard was throwing beanballs. Now, his allegations were probably pretty much based in fact, because Hubbard had already hit 2 players in that game. And Hubbard had pretty good control. So there's probably some truth to the fact that Hubbard was trying to assert himself and, let him know. You don't know how much racial tensions might have played in that as well. But there was this little scene that's captured in that photo I just showed you. All of these, these are Negro League teams. These are black players playing white teams, which is, to me, just very, very interesting. So if we go to the next photo, this is Eddie Douglas. Or I'm sorry, that's Valentin Drake. Drake was an outfielder. He was a terrific ball player. He played for the Cuban Stars West. There were a lot of Negro League teams. There were 2 Cuban Stars teams. One was based in the West. I think it was the Midwest, actually. And the other one was based in the East. And that's the one that folks on the East Coast would see most often. Drake was, as I said, a terrific player. He had a lifetime batting average of 317. I think his OPS was almost 800. His on-base percentage was 380. I mean, he was just a terrific, terrific player. And if you go to the next photo, here's another photo of him from his Agalitas issue. Again, these are the only photos we have, or the only representations we have of these players. The next one, that's Eddie Douglas. He was a teammate of Hubbard's on the Brooklyn Royal Giants. I've been doing research and reading a lot of box scores, and it's really interesting for me to do that research, because then I can start putting statistics with the faces that I've seen. And, I'm reading box scores, and, I read that Douglas gets 2 hits in this game, or, he goes 0 for in this game or another game. Now, Douglas might have had better numbers, but he was older when he started playing the Negro Leagues. I think he started playing when he was 33. So his career was not as long as some of the other ones. Jesse Hubbard pitched for a long time. Next photo. This is Isidore Fabre. He played for the Cuban Stars in the Negro Leagues. In fact, I think he played something like 11 or 12 years for the Cuban Stars East in the Negro Leagues. Another pitcher. But what's interesting about Fabre, which is also true of someone like Eddie Hubbard, on days they didn't pitch, they would play in the outfield. So they were in effect two-way players. Does that sound like somebody we know? Whose last name is Ohtani? Shohei doesn't play in the outfield, but he's a DH. In effect, he's a two-way player. So these are the early. This is the early era of Negro League / African American player collections. If you're going to have these early representations, as I said, you're going to learn a lot about Cuban baseball. By the time we get to the 30s, and we've been talking, primarily about the 20s, by the time we get to the 30s, and that'll be the next slide. I'm sorry. How could I forgot the order of slides, Dave. Dumb me.
It's okay.
This is my guy. I got to take a sip of water. This is my guy, Alejandro Oms, O-M-S. His nickname was the Gentleman, but if you look at him, he looks like he could kill you so quickly that, he had that intense look, and he was an intense player. This guy had unbelievable numbers. In fact, his lifetime batting average, 335. His OBP is 410. And get this, a lifetime OPS of 0.918. Those are some pretty serious numbers. He played for a lot of Negro League teams. He played for, I'm blanking here. He played for Hildale. He played for a number of teams. But the 5 cards you see here are the cards on which he appeared. And at the far left, as you might have begun to recognize, that's his Beacon card. Next to it is his 23-24 Nacionales, which, an example we saw earlier. In the middle there is another 23-24 issue called Tomas Gutierrez. Their images aren't the clear photographic images that we get in the other ones. And then the second from the right or fourth from the left is his 24-25 Agalitas, known as Segundus. And then the one on the far right is his 26-27 Agalitas, known as Aristicas. When you collect, why do we collect? Who do we collect? When you collect, it seems to me that to make the subject come to life, we collect as many elements of a particular subject, whether that's a team, an individual player, as we possibly can, so that we can shed light on the totality of who that person was or who that team was. And I've been so smitten with Ohms. He was one of the first Beacons I bought. I've been so smitten with him, go to the next slide, that I had Greg Kreindler, who's a pretty well-known baseball artist. I had Greg paint an image of Ohms. And if you go back, you'll see that this image is based on his 26-27 Argalitis on his Aristicus. But it's also in black and white. So go back to the next one. So Greg had to do research to find out what were the colors involved. And we're not really certain that there was red piping and that sort of thing, but it seemed to indicate there was. But, as I said, we're stuck with black and white. Now on to the next slide. Now we get to the man, Martin Dihigo. The last time I was on your show, I pointed out that this is a pretty significant photograph because there are only 5 cards known that show a player wearing a uniform or part of a uniform of a Negro League team. This is Dihigo in his Double Aguila card from 1931-32. And if you could try to bring it in closer, Dave, see if it'll bring it up. Right there on his chest, it says Hilldale. He's wearing his Hilldale uniform. The story is he got to Venezuela, and this is a Venezuelan issue. He got to Venezuela and nothing fit him. So he had one of his Hilldale uniforms and he put that on for the game when the photograph was taken. It's one of those little arcane pieces of knowledge, but it helps us understand more about what the game was like at that time. That would never happen in a major league clubhouse in 1931-32. All their uniforms would have been on a hanger waiting for them. Can you imagine?
You know where this this game is being played at?
I do not. I know it's Concordia versus a team called York, but it's in Venezuela somewhere. It's probably Caracas would be my guess.
Okay.
He's beating out the throw there. He was just, I don't know. I know, Dave, you know a little bit about Dihigo because you mentioned last summer that he's in 5 halls of fame, and he is, including the American Baseball Hall of Fame. But Dihigo was considered a giant. He was 6'2", at a time when the average baseball player was probably 5'7", 5'8". He was a big man, and he was a two-way player. He was a pitcher and a position player. Next one. This is one of his famous cards. This is Caramello Deportivo, 1945-46 issue. Next one. Not Cuban issue, by the way. This is 46-47 Caramello Deportivo. These are Caramello Deportivos were issued in 2 years, 45-46, 46-47. 46-47 is a bigger set than the 45-46, but it's also it's a rarer set too. It's more difficult to assemble. I was fortunate to put together a set of these, which frankly I acquired last summer. Next one. This is the one that you stumbled over, Dave, trying to pronounce the Propagandist Montiel. You showed that card last year. This is Dihigo's Propagandist Montiel. Again, a very scarce issue. Next. Now we're starting to move up into the more recent era. This is Minnie Mignoso. This is his rookie card. It's a 45-46 Caramello Deportivo. This was given to me as a birthday gift by a dear friend of mine. You need to have friends like that.
Yes.
Because this is another pretty scarce card. For pretty well-known player. Next, this is the 46-47 of Mignoso. Notice the different stance, or engaging picture, if you will. We know what Minnie Minoso looked like because he had cards in the modern era when he played Major League Baseball. But we don't know a whole lot about what he looked like when he was playing the Negro Leagues. Now we do. By the way, Mignoso played for the New York Cubans. That was his Negro League affiliation. Next. And here's Minnie's American rookie card, a mere 7 years later after his original rookie card was issued. This is his 52 Bowman. And by now, he's a pretty well-established figure. Yeah. Next. This is Ray Brown, another Negro League giant. Ray Brown was a pitcher. He pitched for the Homestead Grays. He was their mainstay pitcher. He was their ace. Didn't make it. Didn't pitch in the major leagues because when the major leagues integrated, at that point he was considered to be too old. But he is in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Without this card, we wouldn't have known what he looked like, or we wouldn't be able to associate with him apart from photographs. Next. This is a guy, Ray Dandridge. In fact, I think I'm a little ahead of myself here. Would you go to the next one, Dave? Okay. Now, you can go back. This is Ray Dandridge, his 45-46 Caramello Deportivo. Ray Dandridge, is in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. He too played for the New York Cubans. Was a terrific player. I'm assuming most people know his stats. I'm sorry, I said New York Cubans. I meant to say Newark Eagles. I think he did have a stint with the Cubans, but it was the Newark Eagles where he played most of his Negro League years. Next one. This is his 46-47 Caramello Deportivo. Next one. Here's a really interesting card. This is Buck O'Neill, the famous Buck O'Neill. Some people claim he was the greatest first baseman to play in the Negro Leagues. He became the first African American coach in Major League Baseball eventually, and went on and was this beloved, rightfully so, figure. But he only had 2 baseball cards during his playing days. The other one, his Alamanque, which is insanely scarce. They're very fragile, all hand cut. But this is his 46-47 Caramello Deportivo. And it's actually a pretty nice one. You can see by the grade. These cards generally don't get high grades like that. But it's a significant card because it's a significant card for an American Hall of Famer. And it's the only baseball card he had, apart from that other rare one, issued while he was a player. Later, there are later releases, but not with this one. So it's a very cool card. And it's a card that, if I were to decide to sell, my wife and I could take one heck of a nice vacation and eat lots of food and drink lots of wine. Next one. Now, this is a cool photograph. This is Don Newcomb. And this is his 46-47 Caramello Deportivo. And try to enlarge it, Dave, if you can. Yeah, it doesn't really come through. But that little dot on his hat is actually a script E. And that E stands for Eagles, which means it's the Newark Eagles. Newcomb played for the Newark Eagles, a Negro League team. And this is one of the 5, including the Dahigo I showed you earlier. This is one of the 5 cards that show a player wearing some form of clothing from his Negro League team. You know, without a photograph, or without a card like this, rather, it's conceivable that people would say, well, you know, was there a Newark Eagles team? Well, you know, there's a lot of data that would say yes, there was, but it's just, I think, ultimately incredible that this card exists, showing that, yeah, Don Newcomb did play for a Negro League team, and for whatever reason, he's wearing the hat in this photograph of the Newark Eagles. Then you go to, and of course, this is his true rookie card, and I might add, extremely scarce, made even scarcer by the fact that he's got an Eagles hat. By the way, so the 5 members or the 5 players rather, that are depicted showing a Negro League uniform, 2 by Martin Dahigo, 1 by Newcomb, and 2 by Jose Maria Fernandez. Fernandez is again wearing a cap, and it shows, I think, the Cuban Stars, or the New York Cubans. It'd be the New York Cubans, and they're on a 48. They're on 48, 49, 49, 50 Toloteros cards, which were Mexican issues. Okay, next one.
Before we move on, how long have you had this card?
Since the National.
Okay.
When I acquired a complete set of 46, 47 Caramello Deportivos. And what's cool about the set, I should have brought the folder in here. The set was completely ungraded. All 175 cards, I think, or 79, were ungraded, you know, in 9 card holders and in a 3, a ring binder, as well as an example of the album in which they had been pasted. I took the 4 Hall of Famers and the Newcomb and had them graded, because they're the 4 most valuable cards in this set. And the Newcomb is right up there, you know, with Hall of Famers. But definitely the O'Neill, you know. The O'Neill alone is worth probably easily half what I paid for the entire set.
Okay.
So, on to the next Newcomb. And then, you know, this is Don Newcomb's 50 Bowman. Technically, his American rookie card, although we now know, no, he had an earlier rookie card. And what's really cool is that recently, about 2 months ago, I acquired this card. And this card shows Don Newcomb's last player card as a baseball player, his card from Japan. He and Larry Doby, at the end of their careers, went to Japan and played 1 year there. This was in 1962. And I do have a Doby card as well. So that's kind of an interesting.
Is that card scarce also?
Yes. Yeah, it is.
So his first and last card are scarce.
Yeah, they are.
Not even American.
No, I mean, you can see this Newcomb is what, a 6, a PSA 6. I mean, you can get American versions of Don Newcomb's card, you know, if you're willing to pay the money. They're out there, and there are lots of them. But his real rookie card, no, because that's a 46, 47 Caramello. And his last card, the 62 Japanese issue, not so easy either. So, it's a challenge. Now, what's interesting too, I mean, one of the questions, and Newcomb's a good example to pause here and talk a little bit about this. And that is, if you're collecting Negro League, for example, let's say you're going to focus on Negro Leagues and you want to put together an interesting collection, you could collect what I call the transitional players. In other words, you could collect the players who transition from the Negro Leagues into Major League Baseball. That would be Don Newcomb. That would be Satchel Paige. That would be Larry Doby. That would be Jackie Robinson. They all played in the Negro Leagues. We know, for example, Newcomb played in the Negro Leagues because we saw his Newark Eagles hat. But now here we see him as a member of the Dodgers. Here's his American card. So an interesting collection would be collecting the transitional players. And I think there's something like 86 or 87 transitional players who came from the Negro Leagues and then played in Major League Baseball. And if you do nothing but collect a card representing each of those players, you've got a really interesting and historically informative collection. Because you can say, go to the next photo. I don't know which one we've got coming up here. Oh, here's my guy, Silvio Garcia. Silvio Garcia could very well have been, and I'll come back to the transitional players in a moment. Silvio Garcia could very well have been Jackie Robinson, because he was a contemporary of Robinson's, but he was a little older. Jackie, I think, comes in at 28. Silvio in 1947 would have been, I think, 32 or 33. Also a shortstop. This is his Propagandas Montiel card, by the way. A very skilled player. He could field, he could hit, he could run, he could do it all. He was one of the players being considered by the Dodgers to become the first Black player in Major League Baseball history. Now, the story goes, and I don't know how true this is, but I love the story nonetheless. The story goes that Walter Alston interviewed him, just like he interviewed Jackie Robinson. And he said, look, you're going to be called all kinds of names. You're going to be, hateful things are going to be said about you. You're going to be called the N-word. You're going to be called all these terrible things. And you can see Silvio Garcia was a pretty happy-go-lucky, carefree guy. And he said at the end of the interview, so if this happens to you, if people start yelling these horrible things at you, what are you going to do? And he supposedly sat there and smiled and said, I kill them. And end of interview. We don't want anybody who's going to kill somebody, yelling these horrible things. So thank you, Mr. Garcia. Melinda, will you please ask Mr. Robinson to come in for his interview? Silvio never made it, never became the next Jackie Robinson, but he's always been a player that I like. Next one.
Before we go on, I got this one of him.
Oh, yeah. That's a 46, 47?
Yep.
It's a good one to have.
Yes, you can see
Yep.
There's the back for the viewers.
Yes.
So we'll move on to the next one.
All right, Satchel Paige. There's so much to be said about Satchel. I wish I had one of his rookie cards, one of his 48, 49 Leaf, but that's way out of my budget. Paige played for the Monarchs primarily in the minor leagues. I mean, he was the true traveling man. In fact, I think that's what his autobiography is called, Traveling Man. He just played everywhere. I mean, barnstorming was part of his life. You can go to the next one, Dave. Here's his 53 This is one of my favorite cards of his. It's 53 tops. I think just a great photo. He even barnstormed, if you want to cut the, go to this image. He even barnstormed in 1946 as part of Bob Feller's All-Stars. Feller put together an all-star team, and the program included photographs of Negro Leaguers, many of which you don't see. I mean, it's hard to say who is whom, but great photographs. Biz Mackey is in there. Quincy Troop is in there. He was just, Satchel Paige was just incredibly unique. He is one of those transitional players. He's one of those guys who, transitioned from the Negro Leagues to the American, to the major leagues. Next one. This is Satchel Paige. This is a Type 1 photograph that I acquired, showing him pitching in his last major league appearance as a member of the Kansas City Athletics. This is 1965. He's 59 years old. He pitched 4 innings. And it's, just, he was a timeless guy. But it's a good reminder that for many players who played in the Negro Leagues, there are no cards. There are only photographs. And one of my prized photographs is this one, which shows you Louis Santop, who is in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. Santop never had a card issued when he was a player. All we have are photographs, and normally all we have are photographs of him as part of a team. This is when Hilldale played the Parksburg Iron Company team in 1920. And this is Santop warming up before the game, and a photographer captured that photograph of him. And it's really one of my prized photographs. So, if you're going to collect the Negro Leagues and black players, it's going to be a mixture. It's going to be a mixture of cards. It's going to be photographs. It's going to be cards from weird places not weird, but different places like Japan. It's going to be little pieces of ephemera like this. And I hope you can see this, Dave. This is a little matchbox issued by a company called Acebo. They're Cuban. And this matchbox was issued somewhere for the 1949-1950 season. And what's that?
I said it's very interesting. I've never even seen that before.
Well, you're not going to see many of them because they didn't survive. And what makes it even more interesting is that in each box was a player card. Now, in this case, it's an American player. So, you don't have Luke Easter or somebody like that. But the card sits on top of matches, which people would use to light their cigarettes or their cigars. It's acquiring little ephemeral pieces like that once again help tell the story of what these players did in order to play the game. In the Cuban Winter Leagues, this is Wes Bailey. He was white. White players played in the Cuban Winter Leagues. But for African American players, it was an opportunity to continue playing the game they loved. And they did. Next one, I think we're getting near the end here. Oh, this is one of my favorite photographs. Talk about transitional players. This is Hank Thompson on my left, I don't know, would be your right. He's the shorter of the two. And Willard Brown, he's the taller of the two. They were the number 2 and number 3 transitional players in entered into the American League, the major leagues. They were signed by the St. Louis Browns in 1947. The Browns were a terrible team, but they were signed by the Browns primarily as a gate attraction. Here you have not only African-American players, only the third and fourth players to play in the major leagues after Robinson and Doby, but they're teammates. You've got them on one team. And, that was supposed to be a big attraction. What happened is that Willard Brown, who is in the Hall of Fame, go to the next photograph. There's a photo of Brown in his Browns uniform. Willard Brown, who's in the Hall of Fame, didn't get there because he played for the St. Louis Browns. He got there because of the body of work he amassed in the Negro Leagues. He did not last long with the Browns at all. And there are a number of reasons for that, but he didn't last long with them. And he never had, I don't think, pretty certain he does not have a Major League Baseball card. Hank Thompson did stick around a lot longer. In fact, he stuck around on the Giants, and he has a Major League card. But Willard Brown does not, even though Willard Brown's in the Hall of Fame. So here's another example of those transitional players. You could get a card of Hank Thompson's relatively easily, and you would have a representation of the fourth African American player to play in the major leagues. Next one. Here's a much later photograph, a much later card of Willard Brown issued when he was playing in the Mexican League. Again, one of the few baseball cards issued for him. Next. And a very scarce card. Here's my guy, Tatello. Tatello Vargas was just one of those great players. A guy that should be in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. He played for the New York Cubans for a number of years. He played for the Cuban Stars East. He had off the charts. Here's his slash line for his Negro League career: 363 batting average, 415 OBP, and an 884 OPS. I mean, just a great player. He was considered too old at the time to play in the major leagues, and we don't have many representations of him. This is his 4950 Toloteros card, which is a Mexican card, but an absolutely great player. He had people when he premiered as a young man. I think he was 21 at the time. Scouts from America were just falling all over themselves. This guy was such a stud. Next. Chester Brewer, a great pitcher. Again, played for the Monarchs for 12 years. This is his 4950 Toloteros card. A card of his, this very same card, in a one, just this past week, went for, I want to say, close to $1,000. At the time I acquired mine, which is, a little higher grade, I thought I paid a lot of money, but it's looking like a real bargain to me now. After that, this will not be in my case, Dave, so don't even think about it. But Chet Brewer, another one of those great pitchers, never made it to the major leagues. He was too old by the time the leagues integrated, and he didn't get that chance. Next one. I don't think anybody needs to have any explanation who this guy was. Roy Campanella is another example of one of those transitional players. He played for the Newark Eagles and then, clearly went on to a great career until he was injured with the Dodgers. In the American Baseball Hall of Fame. You can get, this is his rookie card, his American rookie card. In fact, I don't think he had a, Campanella did not have, no, he did. Oh, I'm sorry. I said he played for the Eagles. He played for the Baltimore Elite Giants. He did not have a Negro League card. So it isn't until he gets to the majors that a card for him appears. Next, this is a great guy. This is Artie Wilson, who Artie Wilson, this is his 50 Remar baking company, a company from Oakland, California. He played for the Oakland Oaks the year that they won the championship out there. In 1948, he hit 437. He was the last Negro League player to bat over 400 because after 48, they stopped. I'm pretty certain they stopped issuing a batting championship because the leagues, the Negro Leagues were coming apart. By that time, it was pretty much over for the Negro Leagues. They would continue on for a few more years, but nothing like their days of glory. But before he joined the Oaks, he did have that great year in 48 when he hit 437. So if you see an Artie Wilson card, grab it. It's just a fun piece of an interesting factoid to have, as part of your collection. And then I think we finish off with Jimmy Claxton, which we looked at last time I was on your show. But this is significant in the sense that this is the only card issued during that period of no blacks being allowed to play Major League Baseball. This was a card issued by the Zenut Company in 1916, showing Jimmy Claxton, and he was thought he got to play on the team because the team owners were told that he was an American Indian, hence his dark complexion. He was not a very good pitcher, but as soon as they found out he wasn't an American Indian, despite the fact that his photo had been taken and he appeared on a card, they released him because they were not going to have a black player on an American professional team, even though it was not technically Major League Baseball. Yeah. So I guess all this by way, Dave, of, and I hope I haven't put you to sleep, and I hope I'm not putting you to sleep, but all this by way of why do I collect the Negro Leagues, black baseball? This is why. It's a way that we can help preserve their history by having these tangible objects that are representations of, these guys existed. They played because they loved the game, and we should never forget them. So, Dave, thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah. I'm going to close this presentation out, or unless you want another photo to go back to and to reference, just let me know. Go with the Hall of Fame, since they now established the Negro League stats into, in there. And some of these players are already in the Hall of Fame and some are not. Can you talk more about this, of why some are and why some should be? Or
well, I think it's a complicated situation. A number of them are in the Hall of Fame because there was that push several years ago to finally recognize that many of the Negro League players were the absolute equals of white players who were in the Hall of Fame. So in that first group of players inducted into the Hall of Fame, that was an attempt to rectify what had been a huge oversight by keeping these players not only out of the game, but out of the Hall. It was a significant step forward to say, yes, these players were fabulous players and we should know about them. And that was true of the second group of players that were inducted as well. Now, in terms of what about the other players? Well, you have to, I guess they have to go in via the Veterans Committee because, you have these guidelines where you've got for the you can't be considered for the Hall for 5 years. And then you've got a 10-year window. Well, a lot of these guys are dead. All of them are dead. So, it becomes a matter of, I guess it's going to have to be the Veterans Committee that votes them in, or they have another situation where a number of them en masse are inducted again. But a lot of these players deserve to be there. They were the peers of the people they were playing against. I didn't show you this. I got so much stuff on my desk in front of me, Dave, here that it's not neat and organized like behind you there. But this is this is a ticket that if I'll try to bring it up close. If you see at the very top there, it says Hilldale Baseball and Exhibition Company. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is a ticket from October 13th of 1923. On that date, Hilldale played the Philadelphia Athletics. Now the athletic season was over, so they're playing, an exhibition game for them. This was not unusual, by the way, in Major League Baseball. At the end of a season, teams would play other teams, usually in the area. But this is an example of a Negro League team playing a Major League Baseball team. The score that day, at the end of the game, the Athletics scored 1 run. Hilldale scored 3.
Okay.
They were beaten 3-1. Hilldale had all those great players on it that I pointed out to you earlier. They were the equivalent. They could play with the big boys and in many cases beat them.
Yeah.
So I guess what I tried to establish today is that we need to enrich our history. We need to expand our history, and part of that expansion is recognizing that there were these players who were very significant, and we need to be aware of them. We need never to forget them. So, I hope a lot of you will go out and start that transition collecting thing. It's really cool. You can go online and get a list of the transition players, and even if you don't have their rookie cards, I'm a little weird in that respect. I want to have the real rookie and that sort of thing. You can just get, their second year Major League Baseball card or their third year, but you've got a card for a guy that was in the Negro Leagues and then ended up in the Major Leagues.
So besides the transition players, who out of this list here that we went through would you suggest the viewers, to like maybe go after? Who would you be like your top 3?
Oh, that's really difficult. Ohms is one. I think he's a very significant player. That's a really difficult one, Dave, because I don't know that you could narrow it down to 3. Totelo Vargas would certainly be one. But then, how many people, for example, have heard of Perucho Cepeda. Now, he's a guy that Perucho Cepeda, he was known as the Bull. Okay. He's the father of Orlando Cepeda, who's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Perucho Cepeda was a monster of a baseball player. He could hit the long ball as well as anybody. But first of all, he refused to play in the major leagues because he was offended by the second-class citizenship that African Americans were given. So he would not play baseball in America. So he played throughout the Caribbean.
Okay.
Perucho Cepeda is pictured on a 1949-50 Toleteros card. And that card, an example of that card just came up for auction. And I think it went for over $2,000. So I would have enjoyed adding Perucho to my collection, but I just didn't have the money the other night to do it. I mean, who are the top three? Josh Gibson. There are no cards issued during Josh Gibson's playing career. None. Yet he's the greatest home run hitter, far and away, one of the greatest. Certainly, so all you can do, unless you have his Toleteros card, which was issued after he died, and which is, tens of thousands of dollars, all you can do is hope to get something that has his image on it. And usually those are photographs. I saw a photograph at a gathering that I attended recently, and it was a little 5x7 photograph, and it showed the Santa Clara team that he was on that I think won the 1938 Cuban Championship. And, he's just in a lineup with these players. And the photo is not in the greatest condition, but, how many copies of this photo exist? Probably not very many.
Yeah.
And it's 5x7, so you can't really see Josh Gibson all that much. But when you look at it, you can pick him out. It was offered to me for $10,000, and I said, thank you, but I'm going to pass. It's so to say who are the top three you should go after. That's a tough one. I would love to have I saw Josh, and maybe you saw it last year at the National. I saw Josh Gibson that the guy was asking $750,000 for. And it was this huge, this big format photo, and it was clearly Josh Gibson in his catching gear. But $750,000, even if yeah. You were going to say.
No, I don't remember seeing that photo. Was it at one of the auction houses, or was it at somebody's booth?
It was at somebody's booth, and he deals in really high-end photography.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was a remarkable photograph. But I guess this is what happens when you've had marginalized groups of people. Once that marginalization drops away and they're allowed into the mainstream, then it changes things in many ways. And part of that change involves, if it's a collectible, the value of that collectible is going to go up. Whereas in the past, it had been down. And it had been down because nobody knew about it. Now, once it's discovered, suddenly people want to acquire one of those. And that's that's the marketplace.
I don't think it's probably not so much as the value, dollar-wise, but more history-wise.
That's exactly it. Good point, Dave. And that's the point I'm trying to make. For me, from the standpoint of history, it's worth way much more. I'm not going to realize any profit on all this stuff I showed you. my wife and children will.
Yeah.
But that's not. I'm not interested in that part of it. I'm interested in what it tells me about the history.
And owning that piece of history just
Yeah.
through a photo. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, this photograph of Louis Santop. I look at this thing. I look at this thing and I think, wow, Lou, good to see you. Wish I'd been there that day.
I mean,
And
that's a
Santop,
beautiful photo. I mean, that's just gorgeous.
oh yeah, and Santop was a big guy. He was 6'2". And he was considered one of the greatest catchers in the Negro Leagues until Biz Mackey came along, and a long ball hitter, you know. So for me, it's just cool to, just if you're sitting there and you want to think about, well, what was it like? You can kind of put yourself there and be in the stands and, see Biz Mackey lumbering back to the dugout after warming up. It's all part of the history.
Did you get that at the National last year too, or?
I got that at the National 2 years ago.
Okay.
Then that led to me acquiring an album filled with original photographs like that, including some Negro League teams. This was an album put together by the Pennsylvania Iron Company for the 1920 season, including this photograph, which depicts which depicts the Cuban Stars East. They played in Parksburg in 1920. And even though there aren't any big names that we might recognize, there are players on that team, in that photograph, rather, who are very well known in Latin American baseball and in the Negro Leagues as well. Man, so, acquiring that album was, in fact, I'm working on a talk right now about the Parksburg 1920 season, and I'm concentrating on the Negro League teams that they played, including that Rubber Game 3, where Jesse Hubbard was being accused of trying to hit a player. And you'll have to come to my talk to find out what happened in Game 4, because they demanded, the Brooklyn Royal Giants demanded a Game 4, but they wanted it at a neutral site, which the neutral site turns out to be the town where I live, Westchester, Pennsylvania, and they wanted different umpires. So,
and when and where is this talk?
I'm giving it on, I think it's June the 6th, something like that, and it's going to be virtual.
Okay.
It's through our local history center. I've given a talk for them before about baseball, but this year it's going to be on the Negro Leagues. I live in a town that was founded by Quakers, and so it's a very tolerant town historically. And there were a lot of good baseball teams that played here, semi-pro teams. Probably the greatest of which was, well, that's not true, but Pico was certainly one of the great ones in the early 21st century. And nobody's even aware that Negro League teams played here. I've asked people, well, did you know the Hilldale Giants played Pico? Huh? The Hilldale played out here? Yeah, they did. A couple times. So we're going to expand people's sense of baseball history when it comes to the Negro Leagues.
And I feel maybe with this talk, certain people probably have something that was left to them or whatever, and then it will come to light. So maybe newer stuff, maybe from then.
That would be fabulous. In fact, I've seen a copy in the History Center. They own one. The local newspaper printed up little cards announcing Game 4. and they were distributed, throughout the county. And I would love to have one of those little pieces of ephemera, but all I have now is a scan.
Okay.
Who knows, Dave?
So
There were no programs printed in those days. The tickets were just, they weren't imprinted with Pico's name on them or anything. They were just, general admission kinds of tickets.
okay.
But for 25 and 50 cents, you could see some pretty good baseball. And in fact, in 2018, the Detroit Tigers came to Little Parksburg, Pennsylvania. By the way, when I say Little Parksburg, Pennsylvania, in 1920, Parksburg had a population of 2,500, and it's literally out there in the meadows.
Okay.
And the Detroit Tigers played the Pico team in 1918. Ty Cobb was there. He even pitched a couple innings.
Dang.
And
that's interesting.
yeah,
So
it's kind of unbelievable.
Yeah. It's almost like pull host pitching.
Right. Exactly. It would be like Albert Pujols deciding to pitch, and he probably could have done it when he was playing.
So like during your talk, you said through your research. So where are you doing all this research at? Like what, like websites or like books or?
We have a really thorough history center here.
Okay.
But anybody who's interested in doing primary baseball research needs to either be a member of SABR or to get a subscription to newspapers.com, because depending on the team you're going to research, you can literally just sit in your home and read newspapers, a lot of which I've been doing recently.
Okay.
It's a whole lot better than when I used to do research in graduate school, or back when I was doing early research. I hated having to use microfilm.
Yeah.
So now I don't have to scroll through all that damn microfilm anymore. But yeah, that's a lot of it appears there.
Okay. All right. So, you have anything else that you want to talk about, or?
No, not today. I'm pretty well talked out, Dave. I need another glass of water.
Okay.
You've worn me out.
Well, you didn't bore me at all. This is very interesting.
Well, I hope your audience enjoys it. I really do, and I hope your audience will think about considering, maybe I should look at the Negro Leagues in black baseball. Maybe this will help expand my knowledge of the game. We can all rattle off statistics from baseball cards that we had as kids and as adults, for that matter.
Yeah.
But what about those bygone days? We can't forget them.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming on. And,
well, thanks, David.
Hopefully we can do another video on, something else. I'm pretty sure we will. Make this more of a thing, instead of just, maybe we could do it maybe once a month or every other month.
Oh,
I don't know. We'll work something out.
Just sending you those images was a lot of work. Jesus. Yeah, we'll figure it out.
I was also
I enjoy your company.
I enjoy yours. But I was thinking maybe if you would like to do a live, have a couple people in mind that would might want to come on and talk with you.
Yeah, we could do something like that.
Okay. Be like a midday live or something.
Yeah, I don't know. It would depend on the subject,
Yeah, I'll come up with something.
Yeah, we can think about it. We can talk about it.
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to end the recording. Just stay on real quick. Don't leave. And then
Okay, Dave. Good to see you.
right. You too.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody.